There we go, that wonderful voice of recording in progress that we all love to hear. So welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you. We see that we have more people coming in. Hello, Alice. Nice to see you. Nice to see you all here, actually. And thank you again for joining us here for Coach Transformation Academy's Transformational Tuesday. Again, we are all very happy that you are here, happy that you've joined us, and that you just chose to spend this time with us. So my name is Frenda. You all know me. I'm one of the trainers here at Coach Transformation Academy. So right now, we're going to give maybe one more minute. So grab yourself some water or some coffee or whatever you need to do. We're going to give one more minute, give a couple more people in the waiting room time to come in, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll just take I've got the waiting room as well. So all right. I love it when as we get started, I start to see these names popping up in the waiting room. That means we are good and ready to go. So let me go ahead and just take a moment and introduce our speaker for this afternoon for us here. So we have with us today Dr. Jeffrey Hull. Dr. Jeffrey Hull has his PhD. He's also a BCC. He's the CEO of Leadership Incorporated, a leadership development consultancy based in New York City, though he just recently made a move. He's the author of the best-selling book, Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World. He's a highly sought-after speaker. Brenda can't talk today. He's a highly sought-after speaker, consultant, and executive coach with over 25 years working with C-suite leaders worldwide. He's also a clinical instructor in psychology at Harvard Medical School and adjunct professor of leadership at New York University. He is the director of global development at the Institute of Coaching, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate. Dr. Hull has been featured in Harvard's Business Review, the New York Times, Investors Business Daily, and a wide range of media. So this afternoon, Dr. Hull is going to share with us and speak to us on the topic of, and I'm going to say it right this time, the sky is the limit, the value of coaching in an age of disruption. I think I got it right this time. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Franda. You absolutely did. And for those of you that aren't in on the joke, she was practicing the title and she said the age of destruction. And I said, well, maybe we're that maybe not so far off, but let's stick with disruption so we can be optimistic. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here today. And you're absolutely right. I'm joining you from my new home in the Netherlands. I recently moved from New York City after 25 years to Amsterdam. So I am settling in, and I can't quite say that I speak Dutch yet, but I do say dankjewel. So that's about as far as I get so far. But it's only been a few months, so hopefully I'll the lessons I'm taking will begin to pay off at some point. But I want to welcome you from wherever you are around the world. And I love to learn where folks are coming from. And I may ping you with a couple of questions, but in the chat, maybe take a minute to say hello and where you're dialing in from. It's always fun to see and to connect with folks as we're getting started. So I'm going to look at my chat and hopefully folks will start to say hi. Lebanon, wonderful. I know that your organization is based in the Middle East, so there may be more of you in that part of the world, which is not too far from me. Oh, Alice is all the way from Johannesburg. So welcome from South Africa and Virginia. Okay, so we're getting pretty far apart. Trinidad, how cool is that, Stacy? Very, very interesting. Oh, so welcome. I was asked by Harris to talk a little bit today about what's going on in the world of coaching, sort of the latest research. As Franda mentioned, I am the Director of Global Development at the Institute of Coaching at Harvard, And so part of my job is to work with my colleagues at the Institute to do research and hopefully build the scientific underpinnings of the profession of coaching, but also to track what's happening in the field as it becomes more and more popular, more extensively accepted and utilized all over the world. So we are tracking that as part of our mission at the Institute of Coaching, and I'll want to share some of what the latest information is around that. And then Franda mentioned that I have a book that came out just recently, about a year ago, called Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World. That book was the result of research that I had conducted through the Institute of Coaching with a very large number of executive coaches around the world, and basically takes a closer look or zeroes in on how the coaching dynamic with leadership has really evolved extensively in the last 10 years or so. And I have to say that the acceleration that I had been witnessing for the last 10 years, which led me to want to write the book, has just quadrupled, I think, in speed in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and because the need for support, the need for agility, the need for transformation is just that much greater than ever before if we're going to successfully prosper and have high-performing organizations and leaders in this very disrupted age. So we'll go through a few highlights of that. And then I thought today I would also share with you some tricky coaching cases and sort of just give you some examples of the research from my book, but sort of real life stories that I have worked through as an executive coach, where disruption and some of the challenges from the pandemic have been brought to the fore. So I'm going to work through this over the next 20 minutes or so. And I hope you will be thinking about questions, what you'd like to talk about. I want to leave a good chunk of time for Franda to come on and for us to have a dialogue, because I'm really interested in learning what you're challenged by, what you're finding to be the big changes in the coaching profession, in your practices, and what the leaders need that you're working with. So hopefully we'll have some time to get into a dialogue. And I just want to welcome you again, now seeing some people that are coming from even more interesting places like France and Austria. So welcome. And let me just jump in immediately into, I need to move the chat box so I can read my own slides. But let's take a look at what's going on in the coaching profession. So I think a good place to start this conversation is sort of stepping back, and as part of the leadership team of the Institute of Coaching at Harvard, as I indicated, I have an opportunity to have affiliate, fellow, and community discussions with coaches on a monthly basis all over the world. We're now running a European roundtable, a New York-based roundtable, a Los Angeles roundtable. We're starting one as of this morning, kicking off a roundtable in the APAC region based out of Australia. I have a wonderful fellow coach who's going to be leading a discussion group, a community group in all the different regions covered by the APAC, all the way from India to Korea and in between. And the reason I mention that is because as the coordinator for those discussions, I have an opportunity to listen in and be part of a dialogue with my fellow coaches all over the world around what's changing in the profession. And so I wanted to summarize what we've noticed at the Institute of Coaching that is really kind of fundamental shifts taking place in the environments where we're doing our work as coaches these days. So here's my top 5, and it keeps evolving. Every time I give this presentation, it's a little bit different. But this is what I consider to be some of the key transformations that are happening in the coaching industry. So you've probably quickly read through this. Let me just share with you my perspective on these. So from C-suite to all suite, and by that I mean that when I started doing my coaching practice, and when many of us have been in this leadership coaching space for many years, we focused on what was called the C-suite. Sorry, watch my arrow here. And in the C-suite, the coaching was really at the very top, the CEO, maybe the top 5 or 6 people. And what I'm finding today is that there is a really strong push towards what I'm calling the all-suite mindset around coaching, which is good for us as professional coaches because we need to be thinking about scaling coaching to the entire organization. And that there's a much greater focus on building a consistent pipeline of highly developed and high performing coaches. So this idea that coaching is really just for the top, sorry, I'm admitting people and then I wind up moving my screen. Bear with me here as I move the boxes out of the way. This idea that coaching is just for the top of an organization is really fundamentally changing. And the other thing that's happening is that organizations are getting flatter. So there's less and less focus on the C-suite, more focus on networking and on bringing up the next generation of leaders. And so there's an opportunity there for us as executive and leadership coaches to focus more on building the entire succession pipeline and using coaching to develop leaders all the way through an organization. But it does raise challenges, and you folks may have some questions about this, because it raises challenges of scale. And also when you're trying to build a business, it's not as easy necessarily to financially create programming when the coaching is at for a larger number or for a team, and not just for the senior executives. So that's an implication for us as coaches to work through. Secondly, you've probably all been hearing about this evolution towards technology playing a role in just about everything we do. And a lot of our research is showing that more and more organizations, coaching, training programs, and so on are using apps, technology-based apps in their coaching. And so to be up to speed in the coaching space, you really need to do your homework to learn what's going on with the technology space. And the question always comes, is coaching going to, is personal, individual human coaching going to be replaced with AI? I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I do think it is absolutely true that more and more coaches will be integrating technology into their profession, into their day-to-day practice. So as coaches, we need to be up to speed, and we can talk a little bit about, if you're interested in some of the latest apps and how they can be, how they can actually augment your coaching practice instead of detracting from it. Another thing that we're noticing at the Institute of Coaching is that like 10 or 15 years ago, when I first started working in the research around coaching, we would make these distinctions between health coaching, positive psychology, life coaching, career coaching, and leadership coaching. And I think that's still true to a certain extent. Leadership coaches tend to focus on the executives or on the succession of next generation leaders. But what's happening in the field overall is there is a confluence of health, well-being, career, positive psychology. They're all becoming crucial to the success of those folks that we coach. So these days, it's less and less important to make a distinction between productivity and well-being, health and wellness. I find that most of my leadership clients are also interested in positive psychology. They're also very interested in wellness. They're also thinking in terms of what we call a holistic or human ecosystem. So as coaches, it's really important that we break down our silos. And you're going to see that organizations like ours at the Institute of Coaching, we used to have separate sections for leadership coaching and positive psychology and life coaching. And we still do specialized programs around these themes, but more and more, we're working towards what I would call an ecosystem approach to coaching. That's totally human-based approach that includes wellness, includes positive psychology, includes leadership, includes well-being, includes productivity. So it's an interesting again, evolution for us as coach professionals, because it runs up against this theme that as coaches, you need to be specialized. On one level, that may be true to be a successful coach, but in the background, you also need to be aware of the evolution of the profession, which is becoming more integral and more integrated. And that leads to the fourth bullet, which is really this idea of moving away from individualistic goal-centered coaching towards a broader ecosystems approach. And this is a huge change because really just 5 or 6 years ago, the primary driver of most of my coaching that I did with my clients was to set goals, individual goals. What does my client want to accomplish? How can I support them? And it's not that that's gone away. It's still relevant, absolutely appropriate to set individual goals so that you know that you're tracking towards a successful outcome with the individuals you're working with. However, more and more organizations are starting to ask their leaders to think systemically, to think about the broader impact that their leadership, that their team, that their organization, that the culture is having on the world. So leadership in general is becoming more of an ecosystemic perspective. And we have to have that in the backs of our minds as we work with leaders and individuals as coaches. My colleague and friend, Paul Lawrence in Sydney has a wonderful book called Systemic Coaching that just came out, and he writes about this eloquently. So this evolution away from a purely individualistic goal-driven coaching towards a broader systemic approach is really important and a big evolution in our field. And then finally, thinking of coaching as a science, not just an art, not just as a craft. And what's important about this is it's going to not be enough in the very near future, if it's not already true, to just get a coaching training certificate. You really, as a professional, need to be continuously connected to the new research around high performance, around well-being, around work-life balance, around virtual work and hybrid work dynamics. All of these things, positive psychology evolution, the science that's being studied around team dynamics. So that's the reason that the Institute of Coaching at Harvard exists. And I know that many of my other coaching bodies that are supportive of this kind of work, like ICF and others, are really focusing on building a scientific evidence-based foundation to our profession. And it's going to become more and more crucial. The good news is there's great science available, and it's our job to stay up to speed, to learn it, and to indoctrinate it into our practices. So speaking of science, let me share as we move into something a little bit more specific about the foundational research that I used to write the book Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World, which, as I said, came out about a year ago. And the starting point for me in creating the framework that you're seeing on the screen was both the confluence of an individual experience as a coach that I was having after about 20 years in the profession, and also working, as I said earlier, with hundreds of coaches around the world and seeing how the profession was changing. So the initial research that I conducted with coaches connected to the Institute of Coaching was to ask them through surveys and focus groups, how has your coaching focus changed over the years? What are the topics that are coming up for you as a coach? What are your leaders challenged by? How have the leaders that you're working with evolved? How have they changed? And how has your practice changed as a result? So obviously those are big questions, and I collected a lot of data from a lot of my colleagues around what they were seeing in their practices. I was also seeing huge shifts taking place in my own practice. And I distilled that down into 6 fundamental dimensions that are evolving within the leadership agility framework towards a higher performing, agile, flexible leadership style that's really required to be successful in today's world. And as I said earlier, this was literally just as the pandemic was coming upon us. And I think this theme of helping our leaders to be agile and flexible and to be able to be responsive to what's going on in their world within their teams has become even more crucial to their success. So if you look at these 6 themes, you will come to the acronym FLEX, and I'm going to switch slides so you can look at the model that I use that's sort of taken apart in the book. But basically, there are 6 core dimensions that became crucial to what our coaches were finding success would lead to success with their clients. And just let me walk through these quickly for you. You can see it's kind of a framework from internal to external. So it's a self-focused starting point and then moving out into the real world, because leadership is both a combination of self-awareness, of understanding oneself and one's strengths and one's capacities, and also obviously leading and engaging with your teams and with the organization. So it starts with the mind and with the mental capacities. And the first 2 dimensions are flexible decision-making and intentional communications. Decision-making is obviously a core skill set for leaders. And 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I was coaching someone on decision-making, it was almost always about how to be effectively authoritative and decisive, collect data, and make good decisions. Well, that's maybe still true, but there is a need now for a much more flexible approach, a much more inclusive and often collaborative approach to decision-making. So flexibility in the decision-making style of a leader has become crucial to their success in today's teams. We'll dig into that a little bit. Communication, what I'm calling intentional communication, is about the leader stepping back and reflecting on his or her style. How do they communicate their goal, their vision, their thinking to their people? And how do they persuade in an impactful way in different modalities, whether it's through a keynote or whether it's through virtual teaching or whether it's through a town hall or through technology, through emails, through texts. All of those have particular stylistic elements, and leaders may be more natural or more comfortable in one domain or another. So developing their intentional capacity to communicate effectively is really crucial. Thirdly, as we work away around the model, obviously emotional agility is something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and emotional intelligence has evolved to be really emotional agility, which is really about awareness of one's own feelings and then incorporating the emotional context, the emotional valence of others into the space as a leader. So how do you work with dynamics with your team and within yourself that have an emotional component? And then moving further outward towards your team, that realness dimension is about authenticity. It's about the spectrum between competence and strength and confidence and humility and vulnerability, which are at the other end of a spectrum of authenticity. So these 2 dimensions, emotional agility and realness, are really all about how you show up emotionally with your people as a leader. And then we move into the final 2 dimensions, which are collaboration and engagement. And you can see that these 2 dimensions have a highly somatic or physical component. It's really about how you presence yourself with your people as a leader. Collaboration includes coaching, mentoring, advising, delegating, empowering. It's all about how you be with your individual and group folks to create an outcome. Engagement is very similar, but takes a further step towards creating the engaged space for productivity or creativity or innovation to spark the best out of an entire group. How do you keep a group of individuals or a team of individuals highly motivated and engaged? So these were the 6 dimensions that became very clear to me as I went through the research, that as coaches, we as coaches need to work with all of our leaders or anyone that we're coaching in each of these domains. Some of them may be a focus area, but none of them can be left out if we want to develop a highly agile, highly responsive, highly successful leader in today's world. And I'm going to quickly show you now just the distinctions between the different valences of these 6 dimensions. And then we'll switch gears in and spend a couple minutes on some cases and then open some dialogue. So you can see in this flexible domain, there's really a spectrum. So you assess, if you use the assessment in my book, for example, with your client, you would assess their strength on being either authoritative and declarative versus more consensus driven or inquisitive in their decision-making process. And you can see that both of them can be effective. It's not an either or proposition. So my book is not saying that what I call the alpha or authoritative leader should be dispensed with in favor of the beta or the collaborative leader. It's not an either or proposition. It's developing your leadership capacities to do what's called for in the moment, to be authoritative at times or to be consensus driven. And the same is true for all 6 of these dimensions. So when you look at communication, many leaders tend to be very analytical and they tend to be very strategic. What do they want to accomplish over time, led by data? That can be very powerful, but it may not move people. It may not motivate. It may not inspire. On the other end of the spectrum, you have inspirational leaders who tell a story, who use metaphor, who talk about the purpose of the underlying values. They can be incredibly motivated and inspiring. But I've had inspiring leaders. I recently had one in a pharmaceutical company who lacked credibility because he didn't back up his inspirational talks with science. And he was working in a scientific field. So you really do need both. Same with emotions. You can be highly data-driven and rational and reserved, and that may be appropriate in some situations to manage your feelings. But that could come also across as cold or unfeeling or not attentive or not empathetic. So leaders also need to develop the other end of the spectrum, which is more intuitive or instinctive or open and expressive and empathic. Also with this idea of authenticity or what I call realness, there's a spectrum. And you think about your clients, some of them will come across as very self-contained and strong. I'm working with the director of emergency medicine right now, who's very self-assured, works very well with his patients. But on the other hand, when he's working with his team, he needed, through our coaching, to develop a more vulnerable space, to be willing to be open and share from his heart how stressful being in the ER, the emergency room, is during a pandemic. So having that flexibility to move back and forth between competence and humility and vulnerability is also really crucial to success. And then, as I mentioned, collaboration involves delegating and advising, but it can also include empowering and coaching. And so as a coach, we know the distinctions, right? But when we're working with our leaders, I'm sure you have all found that many of your clients will not know the subtle distinctions between delegating and coaching, between mentoring and coaching. So it's really important to be able to work with them to express and elucidate and sometimes educate them on how they use those different modalities in collaborations, because it helps them be more agile for different situations. And then finally, all my clients want to get high productivity out of their teams, but they also want to get high innovation. And they're sometimes frustrated or surprised when they learn that what it takes to help people be creative is very different from what it helps to help people be productive. Productivity tends to be very task-oriented, tends to be very fast, organized, and structured, right? We know to-do lists, project management tools, getting things done, meeting deadlines, all of which is important to keep the team on task. But if you do that without a recognition and a reflection on the fact that that may quell or stifle creativity, then you're only doing one half of the equation. So as a leader, you need to develop that flexibility to recognize that fluidity and creativity and innovation comes with a different kind of more unique, individualized energy. And as a leader, to be sensitized to that and create an environment where both can thrive. So you get the idea that there's really a valence between this sort of alpha-driven style of leadership in these dimensions and what I call the beta, collaborative, more receptive style, more fluid style. And so as a coach, when you're working with this research, and if you're looking like at the case studies that are in my book, you would say to yourself, how do I help my client develop this agility? And these are two of the key elements that I focus on, which is helping them know their strengths, help the leader reflect on what they do well as a starting point, because that's the ground upon which they can expand. And then secondly, if you've done any looking at Marcus Buckingham's work, you may have heard of this idea of spikes, which I really love. It's described in his book. I think it's called 9 Myths of Today's Workplace. But Buckingham describes these very specific talents that many of our clients have. And as coaches, it's really helpful to dig deeper than just general strengths to what do they do that's uniquely theirs? Like, what's their gift? And then when they get in touch with that gift, it can be so motivating and inspiring to use it as a springboard to all of the kinds of expansion towards agility that I was just describing. So this is really helpful as a coach to be thinking in terms of strengths and spikes. So let me just share with you, and then I'd love to have some dialogue. So I just want to check the time. Good, we have a few minutes. I want to share with you a couple of examples of how this shows up in the real world. And I hope this is helpful for you in thinking about your own practice and working with leaders or just working with clients. And they may not be senior leaders, they may be going through life change. But it's been a difficult time of disruption for the world and for businesses, obviously, because of the pandemic. And so this level of agility that I talk about in my book is really becoming not just a nice to have for leaders, but really a requirement for success. So here's a couple of examples of what I've recently worked through. I had a reluctant leader, I guess you'd say, in this head of the emergency room that I mentioned earlier at a major hospital organization. And he was getting feedback that he was super competent as a physician, but super frustrating as a leader. And it was for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that he was struggling to let down his hair with his team. His team, as you can imagine, during COVID, working long hours, feeling burnt out, feeling sometimes demoralized and disengaged. And he would kind of come on strong and say, you guys can do it. I can do it. You can do it. We can do it. Da, 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 rah, 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 which is great. On the other hand, it can be alienating. Like, you're perfect Superman. I'm got 3 kids at home. I need a break. You know, we need to be more human. We need to let down our hair. And the challenge for him, and this is where this is a tricky case that relates directly to the discussion about my research, is that it wasn't about, he was afraid of losing his ability to be competent, to be strong. He didn't want to get soft. He said to me, Jeff, my patients expect me to be strong. They don't want someone weak. They won't trust me. And our coaching ended up in a dialogue about his role playing, different roles for different situations. At the end of the day, leadership agility, as I shared with him, is about situational leadership on steroids. Many of you have probably heard about situational leadership, you know, adapting to the situation as a leader, which was studied back in the 90s. But today we need to be doing that minute by minute. And that's what he came to understand, is that he could be competent and strong and stoic in the ER. But then he could step out of the ER and into the cafeteria or into the coffee room with his colleagues and let down his hair and be a dad. He's also a father with young children, and share his fear of getting COVID, of taking it home. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. But when he was able to play both roles, his team brightened and they became re-engaged, and they're very grateful. So they were able all as a team to work more effectively. A second example is one where I was working with a scientist in a research-based organization that is studying medicines, studying drugs, and coming up with sort of new cures, hopefully for cancer and other major ailments. And my research leader that I was working with, his team was feeling demoralized because it was all very project-based and they were losing their ability to be creative. Because as these drugs go through trials, it becomes very project, timeline, results, data focused. And what he was finding, even in himself as the leader of the research team, was that he was getting disengaged. They lost the sense of purpose. They got caught up in all the numbers and all the results, and people were kind of getting burnt out and losing their sense of creativity. So the focus for his leadership in this situation was for him personally, as a starting point, to get reconnected to why did he want to be in research for cancer in the first place. And I had him reflect on his childhood experiences and his college experiences, or why he chose to go into this profession. And that reconnected him to his creativity and how he found the science to be so inspiring, because he really felt like what was possible could change the world. And then when he was reinvigorated, getting reconnected to his emotional passion for the subject, I suggested that they look at ways that they could do that as a team. And that was really profound for him to take the time with his team. And they did this virtually, in a hybrid space now with the virtual, everybody's on Zoom. But what he did with his team, which was really powerful, and I supported him in creating it, was to have everyone on the research team do the same kind of reflection. Why am I doing this? Why is it important? What do I need to be creative? What's at the core of my emotional passion for this work? And then they all made a list of what they need as team members to stay engaged, to stay creative. And they made a commitment. They did a buddy system. Some of them needed to walk in nature. Some of them needed more flex time. Some of them needed downtime to be able to reflect. Some of them needed to not have to look at the numbers for a period of time, to have some actual space between the data and their creativity. And they committed to support each other, to stay connected to the heart, to their feelings, to their passion, to find ways to do that together. Really powerful. And the punchline is that my leader that I worked with, the research vice president, recognized after our work together that he did not have to lose his ability to lead high productive people. He could still focus on the goals, get the tasks. It wasn't an either or conversation. It was a both and. But he had to recognize what it takes to engage with a team, to be creative and innovative, which is very different than being task and productivity oriented. And then finally, a quick example of a recent client I had who's an executive director with a nonprofit, where he was very intentionally trying to create a nice, safe, connected space with his executive team during COVID. But he got some hints from a couple of his folks that they weren't all feeling psychologically safe. And part of it was that he had a couple of people who didn't want to turn on their videos, that didn't show up for meetings. So he could tell there was some things going on and everyone's having a difficult time anyway. So quick through the coaching, I won't take the time to go through the entire story, but the punchline is that I introduced him to Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, also research from Harvard that we are very proud to be affiliated with her. And I shared with him a small snippet of an assessment that Amy created, and we customized it so that his team could do an anonymous assessment. And the punchline is that all the team really needed was to be able to feel safe enough to discuss when things need to be improved. The thing that the boss, my client, was leaving out of the conversation was what's not working and what needs to be improved, and to be a good listener, to be open to that kind of feedback. And so they actually changed the way they do their meetings, and they have a improvement future meeting every other week. where they go around the they go around the room and they ask everyone to talk about what they'd like to see done differently. What would help them step from being partly engaged to being fully engaged. And the leader, my client, absolutely open, supportive, and encourages that kind of feedback. And so that's really shifted the dynamic, because initially people were saying, oh, I love the team and I love the boss, but I don't always feel safe that I can make a suggestion. So it's kind of like an update of the suggestion box, but in real time. And that's all it took. So I just give you those examples because I think it's important to see how my client became more vulnerable, but didn't lose his competence. My client became more creative and more innovative, but didn't lose his ability to be task-oriented. So it's about developing this flexibility, this agility, and as coaches, it's such a gift that we can bring when we explore the underpinnings of these dimensions with our clients and really work, as I said at the outset, in this more broad ecosystem approach to developing leaders that are really agile in working through a very difficult and disrupted period. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and hopefully have a little dialogue. So thank you so much for listening. And I'll encourage you, if you want to read some case studies and find out a little bit more about how to apply some of these dimensions in the so-called real world of coaching, I encourage you to get my book, and I'm happy to show you where to do that. But let's have some questions, Rhonda.
Let's see, we have something in the chat already. Would you rather I read it, or would you rather Brenda just say it out loud?
It looks pretty rich, actually.
Yeah.
maybe Brenda, you want to just unmute and share with us real quick?
Let's see if I can remember this. Well, I can just read it, right? I mean, it lives in my heart. And Jeff, by the way, I have your book and it's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I love that you talk about productivity and that it can't just be a to-do list anymore, and that it really involves the leader.
Right.
And it's more like them getting curious and seeing better what's happening around them. My question is, does it take a crisis for a leader to be open to this type of coaching, or what do you see stands in the way as a challenge to have them open up to see this? Yes, by the way, your talk is phenomenal. Loved it.
Oh, thank you. And I love your question because so often it is a crisis, right? That, feedback, bad feedback, breakdown, disengage, something goes wrong in order for the coaching to come up. But I agree with you. I don't think it has to be like that. I think if you have the opportunity to work with a leader where things are not in crisis, where things are generally going okay, that part of our job as coaches is to be a bit provocative and to poke a little under the surface. Like if you're doing great, what would it take to take you to another level of success, right? What would hitting the ballpark out of the park look like? And because there's nobody that's perfect, and leaders can always grow. One of the metaphors that I like to use when there's no crisis, just to give you an example, is if I'm working with and I've worked with some great leaders that are just naturally doing well, relatively flexible, try to be responsive where the situations get difficult. But I'll say to them, okay, so, which instrument in the orchestra are you? And they'll say, oh, well, I'm a violinist. I'm a really good violin, or I play the piano, so I would be the, world-class pianist. And I'm like, great. Oh, I love that. That's a perfect starting point. So what happens if you want to be the conductor? And they say to me, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, most of the world-class conductors of symphonies, they know how to play all the instruments. Oh, so you think I should learn how to play all the instruments? And I say, well, that's a lifelong journey of growth. What instrument is difficult for you to play? Pick the one that would be the most difficult. And that can just be a fun starting point for the client who's not having a crisis to dig into something that might be more difficult for them. because I agree with you, Brenda. It's great if you can motivate and provoke your client into reflecting on change, transformation, possibility, even before they have something hit them over the head. Does that answer your question? Is there at least a starting point? You have to unmute.
Maybe she's typing.
Oh,
There you go. Hello, Brenda. Go ahead.
just wondering if that helps.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think sometimes, so if I'm hearing you correct, it's what are they not great at? And help bring out that more, or tell me a little bit more about what you were thinking there. Because I don't know, for me, it's almost like then to get people to look at their weaknesses can sometimes be a struggle.
Yeah,
And
okay, so here's the way I would frame it, which is from a positive psychology perspective, to stay away from words like weakness or what they're not good at. So that was why I gave you the example of using something for them to feel grounded in what they are good at, but realizing that that's not the end game. So you're really good at playing the piano, but would you love to be able to add the violin? Or would you love to be able to add, you're really good at being strong and stoic and competent. Would you love to be able to add being vulnerable and humble? And so for them to think about it as an expansion, not as the reaction to something being wrong. I think to your point about reluctance, that many of our leader clients have a tendency to immediately go to weakness. Like, oh, I have a coach now, so I'm going to dig into something that I don't do well. And so I typically reframe more from a positive psychology. With the one exception, because here's another framing that you can use, which is that we all have blind spots. So that's another opportunity. If you are working with a client who may have a little bit of energy around the word weakness or having something wrong, you can say something along the lines of, well, we all have blind spots. Have you ever had a wake-up call where you realized you just didn't even see that train coming and it hit you? And then sometimes I'll get vulnerable as a coach and I'll share an example from my life. Just if it's a struggle for them to think about it. But those are kinds of the ways that I would approach that theme. Because I think what you're saying is that it's not always easy when the leader is a bit reluctant to look at themselves, right? They want to stay in the sort of safe zone and immediately track toward there's something wrong, or I'm broken, or I have weaknesses. So as coaches, I think part of our job is to help them reframe and see it as expansion, as growth. I will give a very light example of the fact that I just moved to the Netherlands and I am terrible at languages. I'm terrible at them. So, I can barely get through reading the menu, but I'm willing to be humble about it. I don't see it as a weakness or something's wrong. I just, I'm bad. It's not my gift. Help. And the Dutch people are like, don't worry about it. It's okay. You just have to learn to talk like you're always sick. Like you always have a sore throat. Anyway, I think hopefully you get the idea.
All right. You have another question here in the chat. What if they say being strong has always worked for me? I don't see why I should do it differently. Oh,
what a great question. Who gave that question? I love it.
That is from Erica.
Erica, thank you for that question. Yeah, especially when they say it's always worked for me. I would ask them to maybe even hypothesize about a time when being strong might become an obstacle to their success. Because, you know, if you've ever read Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, you know, one of the core themes, and I reiterate this in my book in a different approach, is that often our greatest strength becomes a liability. So I will often ask my clients, so when is being strong all the time get you in trouble? Or something like that. You know, it depends on the person and how I would frame it, but I'll give you another example. You know, I do an emotional intelligence assessment that I talk about in the book, which I love, which is the EQI 2.0, which is a highly validated instrument that maybe some of you use. And when I give a coaching session with my clients around the emotional intelligence assessment, they're always a little bit surprised when I say, we're going to spend time on your lowest score and your highest score. Because they say to me, well, why would I spend time on my highest score? That's my best score. And then I'll say to them, yeah, and your best score may be overused and maybe overcompensation. And it's quite often a bit of a revelation for some of our clients to think that their strengths could actually get in the way of their flexibility. Because basically what it shows is that they use it all the time. So to your point in your question, Erica, a strong, competent leader will use that all the time until it doesn't work. And so and during COVID is a really good example. I had leaders who were like, I can handle this. We can get through this. Let's get online. We can be da, 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 da. And all of a sudden people are like in pain and suffering and anxious, and people are dying and they're in hurt, and they need empathy. They need vulnerability. They need human connection. They don't need someone to be strong and tell them to get their act together, you know? So those kinds of expansions become really crucial, I think, in situations like that. So I love that question. Thanks. Great.
Wow, powerful answer as well. So we have Helene who says how to approach our client with the ecosystematic perspective that you mentioned.
Another great question. Thank you. I love this. I think this is also another big one that's an evolving process for us as coaches and leaders, and can be challenging because, you know, our leaders tend to be focused on results and getting their job done. And we as coaches, it is not our job to direct the coaching. It's to take the leader where they are, right? And to accept where they are and work with that. So I am not a proponent of like driving my agenda with the client. I want to listen to where they are. But at the same time, I am also, and I think this is the evolution, we are trying to open up a conversation around, is there a downstream impact to what your organization does? What are the ripple effects of the decisions that you make? How many people are affected by what your team does? Is there anything that goes on in the community that you live in that's directly connected to what you do in your work or your business? So getting your client to think about the more, I call it kind of the concentric circles of their impact, can be actually really eye-opening for them. And for many organizations that are like tech companies, software company, banks, you know, finance companies, the leaders don't necessarily automatically go there. They don't think, oh, there's a downstream effect to the investment we're making in, you know, clean technology or oil or whatever. So great question, because I think what you do as a coach to be in integrity with your work and also supporting this evolution is to really listen into where your client is, and then where there's an opportunity to be curious about the downstream or bigger picture impacts of what they're doing. That's how I would approach it.
All right, so you have thanks a lot and great thanks. And then back when Brenda was speaking, she said expansion is a phenomenal way to see this.
Super, good. I'm
Yeah.
glad that's helpful.
So we have a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions or any comments. Okay, I'm sorry. Vinzu, may I unmute you?
Yes, thank you, Franda.
You're most welcome.
Jeffrey, I just wanted to let you know, I don't have any questions, but I just want to tell you that this has been one of the most promising and amazing speeches or coaching sessions that I've seen. And the fact that you say that as a leader or any person, the fact that we need to be vulnerable, humble, is a thing that many people should think about, because a lot of leaders in the industries and in the organizations think that they have to be strong all the time. But at the end of the day, just like you said, and God bless you for those words, we are all humans.
Right.
Whether you are you don't have a work-life balance or whether you have a lot of kids. So I just wanted to thank you for this amazing session.
Thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate that.
My absolute pleasure.
I wish you all the best with your coaching. I think it's
Thank you.
part of our job as coaches is to bring out these qualities in our clients. And that's how we can have an amazing impact on the world.
Thank you so much.
And I have to agree with Vinzo. This has been so very informative. I have 2 pages of notes, even though I can go back and see the recording, and I'm going to buy the book as well.
Oh, well, great. Thank you. Let me know how you feel. Let me know when you read it, if you like it. I love hearing from folks.
I most definitely will. So I want to thank you so much. Unless anyone has any other questions, I see great job, Dr. Hull, really inspired. Lots of thank yous and amazing talks. And we do very much appreciate your being here and your sharing, and we're going to invite you back too.
Happy to come.
I don't think at one time we need more. Definitely need more of knowing how to accelerate our coaching and just being able to work with leaders. So I will tell you, congratulations on your move.
Thank you. It's fun. It's an adventure. You have to, keeps me engaged, keeps me inspired to learn a different culture. I'm not sure if I'm going to learn the language, but I'm going to try.
It's always, and that's what keeps our brain going, right? Those learning experiences. So how awesome is that? That's right. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us again for another Coach Transformation Academy Transformational Tuesday. Next week, we have Giuseppe Totino. Oh, I'm going to have to work on that one. Giuseppe Totino, and Giuseppe will be talking about communication skills for coaching. This will also be a 4 o'clock session, so I look forward to seeing you all here. I think it's 4 o'clock, right, Soham?
Yes.
Okay, so there'll be a 4 o'clock session. I look forward to seeing you all here. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really, truly appreciate it. Thank you again, Jeffrey, and we're going to close out now. Thank you so much.
Stay in touch. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.